I am so excited. My son and I are going to go back to the Dominican Republic on a mission trip with our church to work with orphans. It's going to be awesome. But after work, I'm going to sneak in a few waves. And I've been really nostalgic about getting back to the same exact spot that we were in last time, in Cointreau Beach. The problem is, when I think about it, all the water that was at the beach that day has got to be gone somewhere else, right? None of it's going to be the same water. All the sand that was on the beach that day has been moved around somewhere else. Probably none of the material that makes up the beach that I loved so much last time is still going to be there. So the question is, how is it that I can ever go back? How is it that a material object can change and yet remain the same thing? Let's consider.
I can't get it off my mind.
Hello, philosophers. I'm Chico. Welcome to the Philosopher Show, where we consider the greatest questions of human history. Now, before I get into it today, let me say I'm not going to be presenting any of the options for this paradox that I'm going to give you. I'm just going to be hopefully trying to sell you on the idea that this paradox is interesting and worth exploring. And then in future episodes, we'll check it out a little bit more, what answers people have come up with. So this is a paradox that I'm going to give you called the Ship of Theseus, found in the writings of Plutarch. And interestingly, it is only one of 4 or 5 different paradoxes that ultimately go under something that's called the problem of material constitution, blah, blah, blah. Don't worry about that stuff yet. If you're interested in the more academic side, remember the Philosopher's Classroom. I go into all this stuff in a lot more detail, a lot more academically. But anyway, here's the paradox. So imagine there's this guy, Theseus, right? He is very famous, and he sailed on a ship, and for years and years, that ship has been in a museum. And let's say as time goes on, right, there's some wear and tear just from the air and seawater, I don't know, something, right? Just erosion. And little by little, pieces have had to be replaced. And this is not uncommon. So, for example, we live in San Clemente. In San Juan Capistrano, there is the mission. And the mission has been restored, they call it, right? But really what they mean is replaced. Different little parts are getting replaced over and over again, right? So imagine over time, every single piece eventually gets replaced. Well, now let's say this is a very famous ship and everybody loves it and everybody wants a piece of it, and you happen to come into a whole lot of money, or maybe you're already rich, and somebody says, okay, we got to make money, this museum that has it, right? We got to make money, we're putting it for sale on eBay. I don't think it was around back then, but let's just say, all right, would you buy the ship? If you say, no, I wouldn't buy the ship, is it because you believe that all those pieces are what really made up the original ship? In which case, it seems like any amount of loss of parts is going to be a problem for making it the original ship, right? Like once you replace one plank, you'd still say, oh, that's still the same Ship of Theseus. Replace 2, it's still the same ship, right? But you keep going, and eventually you should replace them all. You're going to say, no, well, like at what point do you go backwards and say, well, this is the point where I think it's still the same original ship? Any point that you choose seems to be pretty arbitrary. I mean, you could say 50-50, but why 50-50, right? Why not a specific place? Maybe you're going to say is once you replace this one specific part, but then, let's say the Ship of Theseus is just the outside of it, right? Don't imagine a mast or anything now. Let's just imagine, like a canoe. And I know they have some kind of center. I don't know. I'm not a shipbuilder, man. But let's say this one is just really well built out of just the planks, right? So there's no centerpiece. Which one is the original? What is the original ship? And if you say yes, if you say you would buy it, even though each plank had been replaced, then how about this? Imagine now somebody at the museum, as they've been replacing the planks, has collected each one of those planks, right? And they put them all together and they build a second ship. Now somebody else goes on eBay and says, this is the real original Ship of Theseus. I mean, I know that other one was in the museum for so many years, but this is the one. These are the parts that Theseus actually was standing on. Now do we think that it's okay to, that the first one was the legitimate original ship? It seems like any answer that you give is going to be weird, right? And that brings up a question. I mean, you may look at that and be like, okay, whatever, what's the big deal? But think about it this way. Typically, we believe that humans can lose body parts, right? You don't think so, your friend, let's say loses an arm, and you're not like, oh, who is this guy, right? I've never seen you before. No, you typically think that as the same person, even though they've lost some material parts. But then imagine that you continue to lose parts. You continue to eventually get all the parts replaced. Wouldn't you say that's still the same person? Seems pretty reasonable. You might say, well, once you start replacing the brain, then that's no longer the same. And in fact, if you've ever read the original Wizard of Oz, not the movie, but the book, I know you can't read the movie, but you'll find the story about the Tin Woodman of Oz, right? And the story goes, like he gets his arms chopped off, they get replaced by magical tin arms. He gets his legs, his body gets chopped up, and he gets his body replaced by a tin body, and then his head gets chopped off. That's the last thing. But I always think, when I read that, I was like, wait a second. Isn't that just exactly what happens when he gets his body chopped up, right? His head got chopped off. Isn't that the same thing? But I don't know. That's what's weird about this, right? You might say, well, look, there's a part that you can't replace, and that part is where the identity of the person resides. But imagine this. Imagine I replaced one neuron of yours with a silicon neuron or some, I don't really know, like I'm not a chemist and I'm not a biologist, I don't know any of those things, but you could imagine there's some kind of material that would conduct the electricity from one neuron to the other, right? That all it would be doing is filling that job. And then if that works, then you can imagine me doing it with the second one, right? And the third one, and eventually you can imagine an entire brain that's been replaced neuron by neuron in the same way as the body parts were replaced. And if that's possible, the trolley's running in San Clemente today. It's super loud out there. And if that's possible, you can imagine a person that has had every little piece of them replaced. Would that be the same person? I don't know. So that is a question that we're going to continue to explore throughout the next few weeks. Possibly, like, we'll take breaks and we'll look at other stuff and then come back to it eventually. But yeah, it's the problem of material constitution. How is it that a thing that is material can change parts and remain the same thing? How is that possible? Later on in the week, I'll also have a blog talking about, if that sounds weird to you, what should we think when philosophy gets weird? So yeah, it is weird. I agree. It's weird. But it's interesting, and we'll talk about it some more as to why it's important. By the way, if the DR trip, the Dominican Republic trip, sounded interesting to you to support, I'm going to put a link in the description. I would really appreciate any help. It takes a lot of money for us to get over there. We do a lot of good work over there. We worked with a lot of kids last time. It would be awesome for me and my son to be able to go out again. So yeah, please support that if you can. Also, like I always say, the best philosophy happens in dialogue. So let me know what you think about this in the comments, the problem of material constitution. A few other questions. What do you think makes you the same person as you were before, especially since, if you consider it, at one time you were a zygote, right? At one time you were a one-celled organism. And then, of course, you eventually grew in the womb and you developed. But when you were a zygote, you clearly were not your mom or your dad. You were some additional organism, right? And you want to say that was you, right? But that thing shared nothing in common. No material no structure, no mental capacities that you have right now, what makes you the same as that zygote? And if you say that I wasn't that zygote, that I only came along later on, still it's the case that when you were tiny, right, you shared very few of the properties that you have right now, probably none of the materials. In fact, every 7 years, all the body's cells have been replaced, except for the neurons. But even then, you know, electrons move around, right? They're not the exact same. So how is it that you are the same person that you were before? Let me know what you think. Also, please like, subscribe, and tell a friend so that they can join the conversation. That's all I got today. Adios.